Hello and welcome back. This is Jenna from McGuire. I'm always looking for new ways to use my inks and stamps to create new looks, especially for backgrounds. Well, today I'm going to show you how you can layer lots of inks and stamps to create kind of a dreamy background. And the great thing about this is you can change it up to get a different look, and you can use inks and stamps you probably already have. I have lots of examples to share with you today, showing different ways to combine the inks and stamps. I'm working on a Tim Holtz Tonic Mat today. This is like the regular tonic mat, but smaller, and it's a more workable size. I really like it. It's nice and non-stick, but the back side has a little stick to it so it stays put on your work surface and doesn't move around. I really like the size and the feel of this mat. This is the Hero Arts Sunburst background stamp. This is a new one, and it's fantastic. It's a bunch of circles of dots. And I'm inking it up with Hero Arts Unicorn White Pigment Ink. This is a nice bright white pigment ink. Any white pigment ink would work for this. I'm stamping it onto some high quality white cardstock. I personally am using Neenah Classic Crest white cardstock. Now you won't see this white ink on the white paper, but I promise you it's there and it'll show up when we do some cool techniques with it. So I'm going to do this on several pieces of white cardstock. Some of them I'll stamp towards the center, some I'll kind of do in the bottom corner, just so that I have a bunch of options to work with so that I can experiment and make lots of cards. That's what I like to do, make a bunch of backgrounds and turn them all into cards. That way I can have more fun playing, learn more techniques, and then I have more cards to give to people. Okay, so once I have all of these stamped, I'm going to heat set it a bit with my heat gun, just to make sure that white pigment ink is dry. You can tell it's dry because there won't be any shine when you tilt it in the light. Now I'm using my ink blending tool to apply some distress ink. Here I'm using cracked pistachio and tumbled glass. I'm not taking much care to blend because we're going to do so much layering you won't really tell whether or not it's blended, and I put it on kind of light. In the middle I did put a bit of darker peacock feathers distress ink just so it was a little more intense. After I kind of let that dry or heat set it a bit, I'm going to use this large circle die from the Hero Arts Circle Infinity die set. I'll take this and I'll run it through my die cut machine. Any die cut machine would work. And I'm just cutting like a circle out of the pattern. You can see here in some final examples how I placed my circle die so it followed the dot circle background pattern. Now for the next layer on this background that we're creating, I'm using this new stamp set from the current Hero Arts My Monthly Hero February kit. You can see there's that large 6x8 stamp set with birds and feathers and sentiments. There are lots of dies to coordinate with it and some additional like nest and egg dies, some specialty papers, inks, and more. So there's a lot jam-packed into this kit, and I thought these stamps in here would be perfect for this layering technique that we're using today. So from that stamp set, I picked out some birds and some feathers, and I'm going to stamp these again with white pigment ink. The nice thing about white pigment ink is it is pretty much opaque. So it sits on top of whatever you stamp it. So you don't really see through it much. So check out the layering that you get. So far we have white pigment ink, then distress ink blended on top, and now more white pigment ink on top of that. I'm going to dab a little bit of the white pigment ink away to make it softer, and then I'll heat set that. And you can see how all of those layers are showing through. You've got the feathers, the blue colors, and the dots in the background. So let's do another example. Here's one that I'm doing that's very soft. I did the same colors of distress ink. I'm again going to use one of those large circle dies to die cut this right out following the dot pattern. But this time, instead of stamping on top with white pigment ink, I'm stamping on top with Tide Pool dye ink. This is a transparent ink, a dye ink that's transparent. So it'll make it darker in those areas, but a lot of those white dots will show through. So again, you get a beautiful look with lots of layering. It just has a little bit of a darker feel than the one where we did the white pigment ink on top. And any dye ink should work for that. So you can see the difference you get, even though the first two layers are very much the same. Now this time I'm going for a more intense look. So over the white pigment ink background that we stamped, I'm applying peacock feathers and salty ocean distress inks, blueprint sketch distress inks. I'm putting them down pretty generously. I often like to wipe off the excess ink before moving on to the next step, just so I get a clean look. Here I'm using a darker pool color called Antigua. This is a Hero Arts dye ink, and I'm stamping this on top. And you can see the beautiful look that you get with that layering. And I'm even going to do some stamping with white pigment ink and dab some of it away so it's not too intense. So there I did 2 different colors on top. So there are many ways you can layer all of these things together. And by the way, if you don't have distress inks for the blending background, you could instead use other dye inks with any kind of ink blending tool. I wanted to add some dots so there was more white on this background. So I actually took the eraser out of the little eraser holder, and I'm dabbing that onto my white pigment ink pad and stamping with the eraser tip. Look at all that beautiful layering that you get. Okay, so next I thought I would do another background stamp. So we have the dot background with the white pigment ink on the bottom. Then we did some distress ink blending, and now I'm using Tide Pool ink and this beautiful Hero Arts Foliage background stamp on top. So this will just add a little bit of darker color on the top, but not too much. It'll kind of soften as it dries, but look at the beautiful layering you get here. You still see the dots, you also see the fern pattern, and then the beautiful colors. This time I'm using the darker pool color on top of a darker inked background for more intense color. You can still see those white pigment ink dots that we stamped on the bottom layer because that ink kind of resists any ink we put on top. Now this next example, instead I'm stamping with the white pigment ink on top. So we had white pigment ink stamping on the bottom, then some distress ink, and now white pigment ink on top again. And look at that beautiful layering. So I have a bunch of different backgrounds created by layering stamps and inks. Now that I have them done, I'm going to let them dry or heat set them, and it's time to turn them into cards. I die cut large circles from each of the pieces, and I'm also trimming a little bit off the sides so they kind of hang off the sides of my cards. Now since I'm going to heat emboss on this, I made sure it was completely dry, and I used an anti-static powder tool. That's important when you're doing heat embossing on top of all of this ink layering. I stamped the sentiment with VersaMark ink, and I'm white heat embossing it. I really like the look of the white heat embossing on that layered background. Okay, now if you look closely at these pictures, and especially on that card on the right, you can see there's an embossed circle on the white note card that frames that inked circle that we created. To do this, I'm doing some dry embossing with my die cut machine and die. So I have a circle die here that's 1 size bigger than the one I used to cut my inked piece. And I'm positioning that right around my little inked piece. I'm holding on the front of my card where I want it to be. Once I have it framing it perfectly, I'm going to tape the die in place with some little micropore tape here. Washi tape would work too. I can remove my inked piece, and I'm going to run this through my die cut machine with an embossing pad. So I'm setting up my die cut machine as I would if I were doing an embossing folder. Most die cut machines can do this technique. Then I have a Spellbinders embossing mat that I'm putting down. Then my card with the die attached and running that through. What happens is the die makes an impression on the cardstock instead of cutting it, since I had that embossing mat underneath it. And there you can see the embossed circle that will frame our little circle inked piece very nicely. I wanted to add the circle inked piece with some foam adhesive so that it would stand up, have some dimension. So I actually cut a piece of white craft foam to be slightly smaller. And I'm adding some double-sided tape to this. And I will glue it between the inked circle piece and the note card. And this will give it a nice, even raised dimension. You can use foam squares or foam tape, but I would fear that that would get squished in the mail. Okay, so I put that right into the corner, and you can see that embossed circle frame around it. It really makes a big difference on this card. Next, I stamped and cut out these cute little hummingbirds and flowers from the new Hero Arts Hummingbird stamp set. I colored them with Copic markers, nothing fancy. You could do watercolor or anything you want. And I'm just gluing them onto the card. And I thought the colors on the birds match nicely with that kind of dreamy looking inked circle background that we made. I used a couple drops of black Nuvo drops to make the eyes of the birds stand out a bit. And then I decided to add some clear gemstones scattered in the background. I'm using Gina Connect glue here. This is a newer glue and I've been using it for a while now and I'm really happy with it. It's great for adhering little gems like this. It dries clear, you don't need much, and it comes out of the tip very nicely. You can see I was able to make tiny little dots with it. Really happy with that glue. Now it's white here, so you'll see that white through the gemstones, but it will dry clear, as you can see here. And here's a closer look at the ink and stamp layering we did in the background. Okay, let's create a few more examples using the backgrounds that I made earlier. On this one, I'm using the new Hero Arts A Little Birdie Told Me stamp set. I used my anti-static powder tool first. Now I'm stamping some of these images with VersaMark ink and then white heat embossing them. There you can see the anti-static powder tool. Really important to use that whenever you're doing heat embossing on top of any other kind of inking or stamping, because the powder will want to stick everywhere. I find that when I'm doing a lot of white heat embossing on a background, I like to do each stamp image separately so I can really see where I'm going to end up stamping. So once I was done with all of my heat embossing, I'm adding some little pearls this time from Lucy's cards. I again am using the Gina Connect glue. What I like to do with this glue is just squeeze it enough so that a little bit comes out the tip and then just touch that bit of adhesive onto my card, and it's the perfect amount to add the pearls. And there you can see the soft layering, kind of a dreamy look that we get with this example. So just think, if you have white pigment ink, some stamps, and some dye ink, you can really create some beautiful dreamy backgrounds. Okay, on this example, I wanted to show you how I layered heat embossing. So first, I have heat embossed this bird on the branch with white embossing powder. Wasn't sure where to put my sentiment, so I decided to let this cool, use my anti-static powder tool again, stamp the word thanks with VersaMark ink. This thanks is from that same Hero Arts My Monthly Hero Kit. And now I'm adding silver embossing powder, and I'll heat set that. And this gives you a really cool look because the word becomes part of that bird. So it looks like one complete image. It's really beautiful, and it does give great results. So there you can really see that soft, dreamy background because we used a lot of white pigment ink stamping in it. Okay, before we move on to the rest of the examples, I did want to show you that I used the Hero Arts You Are Loved stamp set to stamp Consider This Card a Hug on the flap of all of my Hero Arts envelopes that match the stamping that we did. Hero Arts envelopes are fun because they have that decorative flap to it. Okay, so let's look at the rest of the examples that I created. This one has more white heat embossing directly onto our inked backgrounds, and I added little pearls as berries on the tree branch. I really like how intense that background is with that bright white embossing on top. Now this next example is very similar, but on this one, this is where I stamped the foliage background stamp on top of the layered background with white pigment ink. And look at how beautiful that looks as a backdrop for our white embossing that we did on top. You can see how you can really have fun experimenting with what you layer in your background and then easily turn them into cards that you can send out to people. It's really fun to experiment this way and create lots of cards at once. Now on this next example, I used a sentiment that says, "It's your bird day," and this is from a new Hero Arts Cardinal stamp set. Now another nice thing about this technique, where I created an inked background and then I die cut a circle from it, is that we have all of those leftover pieces of inked backgrounds that we can use on other cards. I can die cut them into small shapes or cut them into strips, but I keep all of those so that I can create cards in the future. So there are my card examples using this technique. If you want a closer look at each of them, please head over to my blog. I'll have photos of them all. I do link to the supplies I used in my YouTube description below. I hope you like this idea of layering ink and stamping. It can really create some fun effects. In the middle are a couple other videos with similar techniques that you might like. I appreciate you stopping by. I hope you'll return again soon and have a wonderful week.